Hello, my dear grade students. At this point, we're going to talk about nervous system. So we're done discussing reproductive system and endocrine system. Okay. So to start with, I'm going to ask you of this question. Have you ever encountered or reacted to extreme fear, say from almost being hit by a car? Okay, so what did you do that time? Okay, so when you see a car that is going to hit you, you move on the side of the road in order for you not to be hit, right? Okay, so I also have an experience, but it's not with a car. Before 2020 ends, there is an earthquake that struck Taal that time. So we were in the lower bed library. So when the shaking happens, first thing that I did is to hide under the table. Okay, so that's my reaction. I'm afraid at time, but that's how my body reacted to that situation. So what enables you to at once move on the side of the road so that you will not be hit by the car? Or what helps me reacted to the earthquake that I experienced. And I try to hide under the table as fast as I can. Okay, so it's with the nervous system. So in this lecture, in this lesson, we're going to learn about nervous system. So for our objectives, we are to correlate the functions of the nervous system with that of the other body system. Second is describe the functions of neurons or nerve cells. Third is explain the nature and pathway of nerve impulse, and name and distinguish the parts of the nervous system. Okay, so what do you know of the nervous system? Okay, so this is the organ system that controls and coordinates function throughout the body. This also enables the body to gather information from the outside environment and respond quickly. So this is how you respond when you are to be hit by a car, or my response when I experience the earthquake. Okay? Gathering of information and then responding to the situation quickly. And nervous system is also the one that controls and interprets all the activities that happen within the body. Okay, so how this one works, let's see. Okay, so again, first, for the function of the nervous system, gathering of information both from the outside and inside of the body. Okay, so the body, the nervous system gathers information. How? Of course, with the help of the sense organ. Okay, so this information, of course, will be transmitted into the processing areas. And what are the processing areas of the body? The brain and the spinal cord. So after the idea were processed, of course, the brain and the spinal cord will determine the best response. And then with the help of muscles, glands, and organs, so the response, the information will be sent to the muscle, glands, and organs so that it can respond correctly and quickly. Okay, so let's give an example for you to understand how this works, okay? So say, for example, you watch a sad news, okay? So with your sense of sight, you see you watch a sad news, and this, of course, this information will be transmitted to the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain and the spinal cord process that what you are watching is so saddening. And then what response is to be given to the muscles and gland to whatever you had watched. Okay, so your response is to cry because of the sad news. So that's the response. Okay, so similar to how you are to be hit by a car coming. Okay, so your sense organ sense that a car is going to hit you. So this information will be brought to the brain and spinal cord. So the brain and spinal cord process that this is a dangerous situation. So the best response in order for you to be saved on that incident is for your muscles, no? Your muscles would move at once on the side of the road in order for you not to be hit. Okay? So that's how nervous system function. But what actually helps the nervous system in transmitting the information to the brain and spinal cord and give the best response possible? Okay, so it's with the help of neurons or nerve cell. So do you have an idea of what neurons or nerve cell are? Okay, so for you to have an idea, I'm going to let you watch this video clip about neurons or
Human anatomy.
nerve cell.
Neuron. The nervous system is an essential part of the human body that helps the transmission of signals across the various parts of the body, or it releases messages back and forth from the brain to the different parts of the body and also helps in the coordination of voluntary and involuntary actions of the body. At the cellular level, the nervous system consists of a special type of cell called the neuron, also known as the nerve cell. The neurons connect to each other using a synapse, which is a structure that acts like a pathway connection that transmits signals to other cells to form the nervous system. Neurons have special structures that allow them to send signals rapidly and precisely to other cells by providing a common pathway for the passage of these electrochemical nerve impulses. Neurons are responsive in nature, by which we imply that the neurons respond to feelings and communicate the presence of that feeling to the central nervous system, which in turn is processed and sent to the other parts of the body for action. The neurons are the basic constituents of the brain, vertebral spinal cord, the ventral nerve cord, and the peripheral ganglia, which is a mass of nerve cell bodies. Neurons can be categorized into three types: sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. Sensory neurons allow us to receive information from the outside world through our senses. The sensory neurons evoke the sensation of touch, pain, vision, hearing, and taste. These are usually present in the sensory organs like the eyes, inner ear, and so on, which send the signals to the spinal cord and the brain. Interneurons communicate and connect with each other and represent the majority of neurons in our brain. They allow us to think, see, and perceive our surroundings. Motor neurons are neurons that receive impulses from the spinal cord or the brain and send them from the muscles, causing muscular contraction, and these also affect the gland secretion. A typical neuron has a soma in its center, which contains the nucleus of the cell, and hence this is where the protein synthesis occurs. The neural function is based on the synaptic signaling, the pathway that helps in the transmission of signals, process, which is partly electrical and partly chemical. The electrical aspect depends on the property of the neuron's membrane. Every neuron is surrounded by a plasma membrane, which is a bilayer of lipid molecules that are comprised of various protein structures. A lipid bilayer is a powerful electrical insulator, but in neurons, many protein structures embedded in the membrane are electrically active. Cell division cannot take place in neurons as they lack one of the two cylindrical cellular structures that aid in cell division. This is consistent with the simple cell division nature of the cell. Dendrites are the extensions of the cell with many branches, whose structures can be called as a dendritic tree. They protect from the cell body and are sometimes referred to as fibers. They are also called as afferent processes because they transmit impulses to the neuron cell body. There is only one axon that projects from each cell body, which is a finer cable-like projector. It is usually elongated and carries impulses away from the cell body, that is, away from the soma. It is called a efferent process. Many axons are surrounded by a segmented white fatty substance called myelin sheaths.
Okay. Okay, so let's continue. So from that video, you understand now what neurons are or nerve cells are. Okay, so from the video, you see the parts of the neuron or nerve cell and the types of neurons or nerve cell. Okay, parts and function, the types of uh, each nerve cell and their function. So neuron is a basic functional unit of structure and function of the nervous system. Okay, so how it helps carry information through the nervous system in the form of nerve impulse. Okay, so take note a while ago that we talked about how information is carried. Okay, after gathering, it will be brought to the brain and spinal cord. So this information is carried through the nervous system, but in the form of nerve impulse. Okay, so these are the parts of the neuron and the function of each. So it was mentioned in the video. So dendrite is a tree-like structure that's the site for receiving impulse. This impulse is carried away from the cell body in the axon terminal. So the axon here is the one that carry information from the senses to the central nervous system, and the myelin sheath, the one that covers the axon, which increases the speed of impulse transmission. Then for every, in the myelin sheath, there is a gap, and we call it as node of Ranvier. Okay, so these neurons or nerve cells carry information in the form of nerve impulse. So what is that nerve impulse? Okay, so nerve impulse is a wave of chemical and electrical change that is conducted along the membrane of a neuron. Okay, so it travels from the sensory neuron to interneuron to motor neuron. Take note, this sensory, inter, and motor neuron are the types of neurons. So let's check first the types of neurons and their function, and before we check how nerve impulse travels in the body. So the path of the nerve impulse. So first we have the sensory, or we call it as afferent neuron. Okay, so the sensory neuron carries signals from the sense organ, take note, a sense of sight, of touch, etc., to the spinal cord and brain. And then in the brain and spinal cord is where interneuron is found. So we called it as connector. So it connects the sensory and the motor. Okay, so this interneuron connects sensory neuron and motor neuron. And for motor neuron, we called it as efferent neuron. These carry impulses from the brain and spinal cord to the muscle and glands to produce the action. So from the function of the nervous system a while ago, so we see the process of how information is carried, how nerve impulse travels uh, from the sensory neuron to the brain and to the motor neuron. So if you are to consider this example, so say for example, you have your tablet, opening your tablet, because we are trying to understand in the path of nerve impulse in the body. So with your sense organs, sense of sight, so you see the different applications in the tablet. So that's the sensory input. Okay. So how nerve impulse uh, travels from the sensory down to the last type of neuron, which is the motor. So nerve impulse begin when the receptor from the sense organ, take note, pick up the stimuli. So whatever is displayed in the tablet is the stimuli, or the tablet itself is the stimuli. Okay, which the environment, which triggers the nerve impulse in the sensory neuron. And then it will be, of course, with the help of interneuron, how brain interprets the stimulus that was seen in the tablet. So the brain will interpret what you are seeing, and it will decide what you're going to touch, the one that interests you. So that's the inter. So after deciding on what app or area to touch, so it's now the role of the motor neuron. The nerve impulse will travel to the motor neuron and will command the muscle to respond. How? With your finger to point and touch an area at the screen, which is of course commanded by the brain. Okay, and with the motor output, of course, your muscle will press on the screen what interests you. So this is the path of the nerve impulse. Okay, so again, with the stimuli, and this one is the sense organ, a receptor, then the nerve impulse will travel to the sensory, okay, going into the brain. So that's where interneuron is found. It will, the nerve impulse here, the brain will interpret. And then after that, the response will be the command of the brain, commanding the finger to point or touch the screen that interests you. Okay, so this is the path of nerve impulse in the body. Okay, but how exactly does it get from one neuron to another? Take note, in the video, you also heard about a synapse. This is actually a gap in between neurons. So neurons are not connected to each other. Unlike how electricity travels in the transmission line, which is actually continuous, in in uh, the neuron or nerve cell, the transmission of the information, the nerve impulse, okay? Though there is a synapse, the information continuously travel with the help of neurotransmitter. So it's actually enclosed in a sac wherein it is actually released at the end of the axon terminal, and it will be received by the dendrite, the receptor in another neuron. So it's how you travel in a road where there is a body of water that serves as a gap. So you will be ferried again, and you will reach the end of that bodies of water, and then you continue on with your journey. So similar to how synaptic transmission works in how nerve impulse travel. So the simplest reaction of nervous system, we called it as reflex or reflex action. So this reflex action is an involuntary and instantaneous movement in response to a stimulus. So this simple behavior in which a stimulus evokes a response without involving the brain. So this reflex arc work in this way. So first is, say for example, this is the stimulus, the danger, the hot object. So the sense organ is where the receptor is, and then the nerve impulse travels in the sensory neuron, and then it will be brought to the interneuron in the spinal cord. So it will not move to the brain because it needs a response at once. And then the spinal cord, of course, will command the motor neuron, the muscle, to move away your hand at once. Okay? So this is a reflex arc. So from the receptor to sensory to inter, again with the spinal, only with the spinal cord. It will not involve the brain. Then motor neuron and the effector. So try to think of this, of what advantage to the individual is a reflex action. Okay, so from the example of how a person is to be hit by a moving car, so with the help of this reflex, no, you were able to save yourself by moving at once on the side of the road to avoid that moving car. So for human nervous system, it's actually divided into CNS, or the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so we'll start with the central nervous system. So this is composed of brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system composed of the nerve. Okay, so we'll start with the brain. So what you know of the brain? Okay, so this is the center of the nervous system. This is the largest and most complex organs in the human body. And it contains, or it's made up of, more than 100 billion nerves that communicate in trillions of connections called synapses. Okay? And to understand about what brain is, by the way, the brain is surrounded by a layer of tissue. We called it as meninges. And the one that helps protect the brain from injury, we called it as skull or cranium. And for us to learn more about the brain, okay, let's watch this.
The brain is the command center for the entire body. It makes us who we are. It receives information from our senses and controls our thoughts and movement. To better explore this incredibly complex organ, scientists have divided it into parts and regions. The largest part is the cerebrum, which is divided into two sides called hemispheres, just like the Earth. The outer layer is known as the cortex, which is Latin for bark. Like a tree's bark, the surface is only 1/8 inch thick, but it also contains millions of cells with fibers that send messages to other brain areas. More than 2/3 of the surface of the cortex hides in hundreds of little folds that make the wiggly visible lines on the brain. Animals that are less intelligent have a smoother brain surface. The cortex is divided into 4 regions. The frontal lobe is for personality and emotions, higher thinking skills like problem solving and controlling movement. It continues to develop until you're in your mid-20s. The temporal lobe helps process your hearing and other senses. and helps with language and reading. The parietal lobe is involved with your senses, attention, and language. The occipital lobe helps your eyes see, including recognition of shapes and colors. The thalamus in the center of the brain relays sensory and motor information to the cortex and helps with consciousness, sleep, and alertness. 12 pairs of cranial nerves carry information from your senses to and from the brain and body. Lower in the brain, we find the cerebellum, which plays a key role in motor control, coordination, and spatial navigation, so we can find our way out of a maze, for example. Underneath is the brainstem, which connects the brain to the spinal cord, a nerve pathway that runs all the way down your back, sending and receiving information from your senses. The brainstem includes the pons, which helps control our breathing, and the medulla oblongata, which regulates our heart and other body reflexes like vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. The limbic system, a region under the cortex, processes our emotions and drives. It contains the brain's reward circuit, which releases the chemical dopamine, making us feel pleasure. The anticipation of pleasure motivates us to repeat important human behaviors like eating, having fun with friends, or falling in love. But it also encourages us to repeat risky behaviors like taking drugs. Drugs signal the brain to release unusually strong amounts of dopamine. This flood of dopamine causes the high that drug users seek and makes it difficult to enjoy more normal, simple pleasures. Repeated activation of this reward pathway can lead to addiction. The limbic system includes the amygdala, which processes emotions, and the hippocampus in the temporal lobe, which is like a memory indexer that sends memories to certain parts of the brain for storage and retrieves them when you need them. The brain controls many actions through rapid nerve impulses, but there are some body functions that the brain modulates over many hours or days by secreting hormones via special glands like the hypothalamus, which wakes you up in the morning and gets the adrenaline flowing, like during a test or athletic event. The pituitary gland, often called the master gland, which helps control growth, body temperature, pregnancy, and childbirth. And the tiny pineal gland, which helps to control sleep and circadian rhythms. These are just a few of the parts and functions of the beautiful, amazing, and complex human brain. It is the center of our world and seat of our intelligence. We must exercise it, protect it, and understand how important it is to every thought and action in our daily lives.
Okay, so from that video, you understand how important the brain is. Okay, so you see the parts, the function of each, and it is, we are reminded to take care of our brain. Okay, so an additional, of course, other than learning the parts and functions, so you have here, let's see where you are good at. If what part of your brain is really functioning, are you a right brain, is it your right brain is the one functioning, or your left brain is the one functioning? So here for the left brain, so if you're very good at numbers and analytical thinking and logic, so your left brain is the one working. Now for those who are very good at expression, emotional intelligence, and imagination, remember that you are a right brain dominant. Okay, So try to think of uh, what is really dominant. Is it the left or the right? Okay. So other than brain, we also have the spinal cord. Okay. So what do you know of the spinal cord? Okay. So you see here the spinal cord, the yellow one, connects the brain to nerves throughout the body. Okay. So the spinal cord is a cylindrical shape that descends from the medulla oblongata. And this is the main communication link between the brain and the body. It has 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So we have here the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbar, and the sacral nerves. So this spinal cord transmit impulses to and from the brain as a reflex center. So take note a while ago that this is actually involved in reflex arc. So it is around 45 centimeter in men and around 43 centimeter long in women. So what's actually the function of spinal cord? It's the one that transmit the nerve signals or transmission of nerve signals from the motor cortex to the body and from the afferent fibers of the sensory neuron to the sensory cortex. And this is also the center for coordinating many reflexes. So for the injury, once our spinal cord is injured, so when we say injured, this is the damage to the spinal cord that causes changes in its function, either temporary or permanent. So when we say a complete injury, there's a total loss of sensation and muscle function. And for incomplete, meaning some nervous signals are able to travel fast to the injured area of the cord. So take note of that. Okay. So if it is a complete injury, there's a total loss of sensation and muscle function. So this injury results from physical trauma such as car accidents, gunshots, falls, sport injuries, but it can also result from non-traumatic causes such as infection, insufficient blood flow, and tumors. Okay, so this is all about the brain and the spinal cord. So that's for the central nervous system. Okay, what about for the peripheral nervous system? So this is actually divided into two, the somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. So for the somatic, it's responsible for actions that a person can control. So this is voluntary. Okay, such as stretching, walking, running. For autonomic, this controls autonomic functions that do not require a person to think, such as breathing, digestion, and the like. Okay, so again, this is for the parts of the nervous system. This time, we're going to move on to the common diseases of the nervous system. First, we have the meningitis. So this is the inflammation of the meninges of the brain and spinal cord. And this is brought about by bacterial infection or virus. Symptoms are stiff and painful neck, fever, headache, vomiting, seizures, trouble breathing, and slight headache. And of course, this will be treated with the help of antibiotics. Another disease is cerebral palsy. So result in a lack of full of control of physical movement and muscle tightness. So symptoms are seizures, intellectual disability, light limp, and difficulty in walking. So it needs surgery to be treated. We also have Parkinson's disease. So this is a disorder of the nervous system that affects the movement of the person. So you observe tremor, slow movement, impaired posture, penmanship changes, speech changes, depression, sleep disorder, and a lot more. This cannot be cured, but symptoms can be improved through surgery to regulate the region of the brain. And we also have brain tumor. It's a meningeal tumor formed in the meninges that cover the brain and the spinal cord. So here we have trouble walking and change of mental status. So since this is tumor, this is treated with the help of surgery, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy. Okay, so these are the another last one is epilepsy. So this is cluster of nerve cells or neurons that act abnormally. So here, loss of muscle tone, jerking movements, brief loss of consciousness, and muscle stiffness. And here, for treatment, we have drug therapy and anticonvulsant drugs. Okay, so these are some from the many examples of diseases of the nervous system. And of course, to avoid this, how can we possibly take care of our nervous system? How can we keep our nervous system healthy? First, ensure adequate intake of healthy fats such as fish oil and vegetable oil. Adequate vitamin D and B12 is essential to maintain optimal myelin in the neurons. Okay. Another is to exercise the nervous on a daily basis. How? By stretching the arms and reading in order for the motor and sensory pathways to be used. Okay, so you do stretching and again, you have to read. Okay. And spend a minimum of 15 minutes per day writing on a paper as legibly as you can. And finally, engage yourself in social activities to keep your brain active. So at this point, I know that our social life is so limited. Now we can't socialize. So please still find time to socialize with family members and friends because it will keep your brain active. Okay, so that's the end of our lecture. So I hope you get something. So see you in our next lecture video. Bye everyone, and thank you for listening.